Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our 2024 Spring Training Series. My name is Reagan Sokolowski, and I'm a marketing specialist here at ESC Spectrum. Today, we have our regulatory and reporting engineer, Abbie Skorzewskie, and lead regulatory and reporting engineer, JessLee Sanchez. They will be discussing the certification process for new analyzers in StackVision. This year, we're doing things a little differently during our webinars. As you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a chat box. You can type into the Q&A panel or chat box to interact with our speakers, and feel free to discuss any topics throughout the webinar. Keep in mind that everyone can see what is in the chat box. Abbie and JessLee will answer any questions to the best of their ability. Small reminder, we will be recording this webinar and it will be available immediately after using the same link that you used to register. Please allow us at least a week to upload the recording into our customer community. With that being said, let's begin the training.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Reagan. As Reagan said, my name is Abbie Skorzewskie. I've had the opportunity to be a regulatory and reporting engineer here at ESC Spectrum for about 2 years now. I get the privilege of presenting with my team lead, JessLee. And so, go ahead, JessLee.
Thank you, Abbie. As specified before, my name is JessLee Sanchez. I've been working with ESC for a little over 8 years now, and looking forward to this. And if you have any questions, please, feel free to reach out to us. There's our emails that are specified for any questions or follow-up questions that you may have thought of later on. So, yeah.
Welcome. Awesome. So, getting ready to dive right in. Today, we're talking about putting new analyzers into your StackVision so we can report come reporting month with ease. To make sure we're on the same page, for the examples we're going to be using today, I am focusing on a permanent like-kind analyzer swap. So what does that mean? That means we're going to have the same sample collection, be it dilution extractive or dry extractive, in situ, whichever one. We're going to make sure the new one is the same as the old one, along with the same analysis, the pulse fluorescent, UV fluorescent, however it works. Just making sure that the new analyzer uses the same sample collection and analysis as the old one. However, the full scale range does not have to be the same for it to qualify as a permanent like-kind analyzer replacement. That being said, we will point out when in the process it differs from a like-kind analyzer replacement to just an analyzer replacement if one of those are not the same. It is a very similar process, but for the sake of simplicity of this example, we just went with a like-kind. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, so before we go ahead and continue going, we understand that there are some customers that use Prism, our Prism software. Aside from our StackVision software, please remember that this was going to be specified or more directly aimed towards StackVision users. Well, on the Prism side for the software, most of these updates are going to be done in the ECMPS application tool itself. So just keep that in mind, that this is going to be more aimed towards StackVision itself, but the same process, and you'll see some examples as we get going forward where we identify these certain tabs in the ECMPS application. So just kind of keep that in mind.
So making sure we start off on the right foot before we touch anything, before we mess anything up, we want to make sure we know where we're starting. So we're going to start by evaluating our EDR files to know what errors we have, or hopefully what errors we do not have. Because at the end of this process, I'm going to strongly encourage you to evaluate your EDR files, because what we're about to do is mess with the 3 tools we use to report, right? Our ECMPS client tool, our StackStudio, and our StackVision. So we want to know where we're starting in case we change something or we don't follow everything exactly correct and we generate errors. We want to know what caused that. So start off on the right foot. I strongly recommend evaluating your EDR files. Moving from there, we want to make sure we get all of our ducks in a row. We want to make sure we know what the component type of the new analyzer is, the manufacturer, the model version, and our serial number. So with that being said, as I previously stated, we typically use 3 tools to generate our EDRs. We use the ECMPS, StackVision, and StackStudio. So we want to make sure what's in ECMPS is accurate and true to what we've changed, but also that communicates into StackStudio, which will communicate into StackVision, right? And it's the communication between these three tools that will save us gray hairs and stress come reporting month. So we're going to start with having this information and dive into the fun stuff. So we're going to get into ECMPS. We're going to select our monitoring plan and the unit that we're changing the analyzer on. Hopping into components, we're going to end the old component under analyzer range at the bottom of the page, and I'll show that on the next slide. And we're going to make sure that when we enter the information that we previously gathered under our new component, that the start date is the exact next hour. So if I say it ended at 4:19 hour 17, I'm starting my new component at 4:19 hour 18. Again, for simplicity of this example, I took the ease of using the quarter boundary. So I'll go ahead and point that out here, where I came under components in our ECMPS client tool, selected analyzer range at the bottom, and then our end date I put as 3:31 hour 23. Entering our new component, I put in all of that good information we gathered, what analyzer it is, the sample acquisition, our base code, manufacturer, model version, all the good stuff, making sure that the start hour of that analyzer is the exact following hour from the end date on the previous component. From there, we're going to hop into system, and we're going to select the system that's using this analyzer and do the exact same thing we did. We're going to put in the end date, the exact same end date for the old component. We're going to put in the exact same end date, or the exact same start date, excuse me, for the new component. And we're going to make sure that those line up. And then we're going to hold our breath. We're going to click Evaluate Monitoring Plan. We're going to cross our fingers and pray it comes back with no errors. So we've gone ahead and gone through systems, components. We've evaluated the monitoring plan. It came up with no errors. We do our little happy dance. Now we're going to export the monitoring plan and go ahead and throw it on our desktop where we use StackVision. Now, let's say you hit Evaluate Monitoring Plan and it did come up with errors. These are some of them you're typically going to see. This first one will show you if your start date and your end date aren't consecutive. If you, let's say, ended it at 3:31 hour 23, and then you put the start date as 4:02 hour 7, that's where you're going to get this first error. The nice part is it tells you exactly which component you're working with, which one you ended too soon. The secondary error from the ECMPS client tool is if you do not associate the new component under systems. So those are two simple errors that you could see come up if those are steps you forget. So then you just easy peasy fix, go in, associate it, or adjust your end dates. Make sure you write those end dates down because we're about to use them in StackStudio. So before I dive on, do we have any questions up until this point?
I'm not seeing any.
Awesome. So we are going to go into our next tool that we use to help generate our EDR files, and we are going to open StackStudio. So on the left-hand panel, we have that toolbar, and we're going to open regulatory programs, and under Part 75, we're going to select monitoring plan. And then you'll see a toolbox come up like you see pictured on the left-hand side of this screen. You're going to import file, and you're going to import the monitoring plan that we just extracted from ECMPS. And what this is going to do is make sure ECMPS is communicating all of the accurate information, including the updates we just made, into StackStudio, which will relay it into StackVision later. So this is a really important step to make sure your data is correct and accurate through the entire quarter. This next step, however, I am guilty of forgetting time and time again. We're going to have to take this same drop bar that we see on the left-hand corner, and where we just were in monitoring plan, we're going to go up at the top, and under sources, we're going to select parameter. And for this example, I am using an O2 analyzer, so the parameter I would bring up is an O2, or is the O2 parameter. And under Part 75 settings at the bottom, we're going to change that EPA component ID. So in the example, the component I ended was component 110. The component I'm starting is component 111, so I'm going to adjust it right there. And while this is an easy step to forget, believe me when I tell you it will create pages of XML errors, and it is an easy thing to forget. It's not hard to correct, and then you can take a deep breath and actually enjoy your coffee when it comes to reporting month. If you had opened StackStudio through StackVision, you're going to need to close StackVision and reopen it to make sure those changes apply. And we want to make sure we're editing everything in the right modem so everything is communicating efficiently. If you just open StackStudio from the icon, you're good. Next, we're going to open StackVision. Do we have any questions there before I dive into StackVision?
Yes. From Jeff Burkett, what begin date to use for a new unit's analyzer? The initial startup of the unit or the date of commencing commercial operation?
JessLee, I'll go ahead and let you field that.
Yeah. So for the begin date, you're going to want to essentially, so when that analyzer has been situated and everything, correct, everything's been done appropriately, it's going to be based on, I believe, your initial startup. I'm sorry, it's going to be the initial startup. I'll have to verify just to make sure, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be your initial startup. Because once you actually once the unit is online, anything that's offline, it's not really going to care. So once you actually turn the unit online, if it doesn't have the appropriate begin date and it has an incorrect component ID, you're going to start getting those errors, Jeff. So you want to make sure that when you commence startup, you have the correct component ID, and that's what the date's going to reflect. Anything going beyond that date with unit op hours. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah,
awesome.
I think we're good.
Perfect. So now we get to get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty because we're on our third and final tool that we're using. So we're going to dive into StackVision. The unique thing with an analyzer swap is we get to create a certification event. Not only do we have our QA tests we get to comply with, but we need to make sure we have this cert event so ECMPS is aware that you swapped your analyzers. It essentially throws a flag to remind it to search for it. So to be able to do this, we're going to go into Tools in StackVision under QA and Certification and select Miscellaneous Tests. We're going to go ahead and hit that beautiful little plus arrow, and it's going to bring up the wizard. So we're going to select the analyzer replacement because we're not repairing it, we're replacing a new analyzer. And then we are going to, for the sake of this example, and again, the simplicity of it, we are going to select the permanent like-kind analyzer replacement. This is where earlier I had said if you're just swapping analyzers and it's not a like-kind replacement, this is where the process deviates. This is where you'll select method 101 right underneath it. You're going to have a couple additional QA tests. However, for the sake of this example, we're not going to dive too far into that. And the important thing here is we see on the right-hand side, when did this event occur? That is the same start date we put into ECMPS. So again, making sure dates are consistent because one fat-fingered mistake, lots of errors in ECMPS. Our goal, avoid that. So it's a quick thing, it's a quick and easy check. So then we go ahead and hit down. We double verify. This event occurred at the start date of my new analyzer. We're going to go ahead and select the tests, the QA tests that we need to comply with for this analyzer swap. In this case, we're going to use number 11 with the RADA, the 7-day cal, and your linearity. As found in the Part 75 policy manual, I included a little screenshot of that chart if you want to reference it. I also hyperlinked it on the slides, so if you guys would like to click that and dive a little more into what events you would need if it's just a straight analyzer swap, that's all right there on this slide. So from there, on the lower half of that wizard box that popped up, we're going to look at the question, have all of the required tests been successfully completed? Now, it's best practice that when you swap an analyzer, the very first thing you do is run a calibration. They're the same as your daily cals, and that is the first step to make sure you have conditionally valid data. We also recommend that you run your RADA last, because the last thing you want to do is run your RADA second, then run a linearity, fail the linearity, and have to run your RADA again. Not ideal. No one wants to pay for that. No one wants to go through the stress of having a RADA team out twice when it could have been avoided. So that's things we suggest. That is not mandatory, just what we've seen. But here you can also select no, because a lot of times if you swap an analyzer, let's say at the end of the quarter, it's hard to get a RADA team out that quickly. It's hard to comply with all the tests you need within a quarter boundary, especially if you do the analyzer swap 2 weeks before the quarter boundary. So if you hit no, that's okay. It's going to pop up. That essentially flags it where, let's say you're reporting this in 2Q, your Q3 reporting, it's going to tell ECMPS to look back of, oh, we needed these tests for this certification event. Let's verify they did this in Q3. Again, sake of simplicity, I hit yes for this example. And then down here where it says, when was the last required test completed? Ideally, that's going to be the date of your RADA, and that's what you're going to put there. And that's essentially tying it all up, putting a nice little bow on it for ECMPS, and saying, here you go. So I'm going to pause there before we get into data lab. Do we have any questions on creating the certification event?
I'm not seeing any.
Awesome. So plowing ahead.
Oh, I have one. Is the like kind definition affected by manufacturer, say going from Teledyne to Thermo?
It is not, as long as your, let me pull up my notes really quick, your sample collection and your same analysis. You're using the same sample collection and the same analysis.
Okay, and then
Those
Susan said, oh, sorry. For Jeff's previous question, he can refer to section 13 of the Part 75 Emission Monitoring Policy Manual for more information.
Awesome. Thank you, Susan. Okay, so now we are on our last step where we're adjusting things, where we're changing things, and we are going to open up Data Lab in StackVision. Because while we all know and love Process Now for the powerful tool that it is, 9 times out of 10, it will not change a partial day when we have this component ID change. So we've imported the monitoring plan in StackStudio, which tells it going here forward for complete days, we're going to change that component ID, in this case, from 110 to 111, right? But for the initial day of the swap, it typically does not do that. And then you're confused as to why you have 7 invalid hours when you run your XML in ECMPS. So to avoid that, we're going to hop into Data Lab. We're going to pull up our parameter that's impacted by this analyzer swap, which again, in this case, is O2. And then we're going to go under Fields and on the top toolbar, expand Part 75, and select the component ID so it pulls it up. And as you see in this example, it still has my old component ID number. So I'm going to double check in ECMPS what the new component ID number is, and I'm going to verify the date. So for the sake of this example, I started at hour 0, so I'm going to change hour 0 to 32 into component ID 111. If I changed it at hour 17, I'm starting at hour 17, and I'm going component 110 to 111, hour 17 to hour 23. And so it's tedious, but again, it saves so much stress at the end of the quarter when we do go to report. And then we get to go right back to where we started. We get to export our XML files, evaluate them in ECMPS, and hopefully sit back and breathe a sigh of relief when it comes up with hopefully no errors or the same errors that we saw when we first evaluated at the start of this process. And again, while this step is not mandatory, I highly encourage it because we know exactly what we've touched today. We know we've touched our component IDs, our systems in ECMPS. We know we've updated a new monitoring plan, and we know we've changed some things in StackVision as well. So we want to make sure that if one of those things are impacting our errors in our EDRs, we can change that now, because it's easier to do it now while it's fresh in our brain, as opposed to 2 months later when we're wondering what we did on June 13th. So from there, we're open to questions.
Okay, I'm not seeing any so far.
And one last thing that Abbie was pointing out when changing these component IDs in StackVision in respect with Data Lab, something that you also may want to be wary about is in Cal Labs. Again, a component ID is associated, obviously with the pollutant. So if you're still receiving errors, that's another place to go look. And it has the same field where you can bring up the component ID and take a look at to see what component ID is associated, because cows may have already gone through their daily sequences and everything as such, but it may still have the old component ID. So if you're still receiving errors somewhere along that point, go ahead and bring up Data Lab and with filter to respect to component ID, and you can actually edit as you would here in StackVision and Data Lab, so that way it's appropriately reflected in your ECMPS tool.
All right. I'm not seeing any other questions, but if anyone does have any additional questions that didn't get answered during the presentation, you can absolutely feel free to email Abbie or JessLee with your questions, or the marketing inbox. I can always pass that along to them. Like I said, the recording of this webinar will be available right after we conclude it. And then you can actually revisit the same link that you used to register to find the recording as well. But if we don't have any other questions, I think we can wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.